All right. Namaste, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Jeffrey Armstrong. Jeffrey Armstrong is the founder of VASA, Vedic Academy of Science and Arts. He's also a co-chairman for the Vedic Friends Association and a scholar on the British Board of Dharmic Scholars. As a yoga practitioner for the last 50 years, he retired from corporate life 23 years ago and has been teaching full-time on behalf of the Vedic Sanatan Dharma. Jeffrey's a best-selling author, philosopher, poet, Vedic astrologer, and if you go to the About section on his website, you can learn more. You can read his blog, check out his YouTube channel, and there's a lot of classes on Vedic wisdom available there. Now, our special guest today is Nilesh Nilkanth Oak. He holds a BS and MS in chemical engineering and an executive MBA. His interests are in astronomy, archaeology, geology, genetics, quantum mechanics, economics, ancient narratives, and philosophy. He's the author of When Did the Mahabharata Happen? So I'd like to welcome you, Nilesh. Thank you for coming on. Jeffrey has
Thank you.
so highly of you over the years, and I can't tell you how many times he's mentioned you in our classes. So it's a big thrill for us to actually have you in person. I just want to start by asking each of you the same question, because I think some of the people on our site today have no idea what the Mahabharata is, and who cares? I mean, what does it matter that we need to know the exact dating of the Mahabharata? Can you answer that from your perspective? And then I'll ask Jeffrey.
Okay. Namaskar, everyone, and thank you for joining. So, who cares for Mahabharata, and why does it even matter as to when the Mahabharata War happened or Mahabharata took place? So to begin with, Mahabharata is one of the key historical document that has survived. So India, I mean, like all the nations, all the places in the world has civilization, has history, but unless something survives that we can study, we won't know about it. The direct connection for most of you, I presume, or I hope, is that if in some form you have come in contact with Bhagavad Gita, the Krishna's message to Arjuna and the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, which is also one of the key Upanishad, then the connection with the Mahabharata is that the Bhagavad Gita actually comes from Mahabharata. It is part of the Mahabharata. Quickly, Mahabharata, if you want to imagine the size of that document, think of the Greek epics, Iliad and Odyssey. Just from the size perspective, combine them together and then multiply that by 8 times. You know, that's how big the Mahabharata is. And the last one, as to why the timing matters. Because, well, first thing, the time, the kala is infinite. You know, it goes from infinity in the past to the future, you know, the infinity. So in that sense, you know, in the Sanskrit term is Mahakal. And there is a temple of Shiva in Ujjain, you know. It's very astronomically significant place, by the way. And so Mahakal is from infinity to infinity. But since we are dealing in a finite world here, if we want to know something and want to have a context to understand culture, civilization, technology, everything, we need a time. And so if we happen to know, or if we can figure out the timing of Mahabharata, it becomes a sheet anchor for the Indian history and therefore the world history. And therefore, if we can find out, it's very important to know the timing of Mahabharata.
All right. Jeffrey, same question for you. Why is this so important?
And I like to begin with Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshvara, Guru Sakshat, Parabrahma, Tasmai Sri Guru Namah. Because what Nilesh said is so very important. Not only are these texts ancient, and not only are they large, but they're filled with very valuable information. And according to those texts, they were specifically given to us to guide us into a better future by having the necessary insights to get along with one another, to know how to live on a planet like ours. And so the fact that certain historical and political interests have been violent over the last 300 years, not the best day for humankind. But when that happened, it created a lot of unnecessary and unhelpful prejudices against cultures like India. And therefore, it caused the neglect of her library and her great literatures. And what people like Nilesh and myself and many others are now doing is kind of a renaissance, bringing that knowledge forward as an important contribution to everyone's well-being. If they're interested, if not, then it's a literature for them to read out of curiosity. There's no compulsion. But most everyone who's well-educated, who reads the Vedas, who reads the Mahabharata, is astounded at its beauty, depth, greatness. And the work of Nilesh is because, unlike any other historical document we know of, there are several hundred accurate astronomical references in the Mahabharata to the time in which it was written. And Nilesh is going to tell us about that in a way that no one really has before him. But it's important to put the right context on human civilization. And again, so we can value this great knowledge.
I noticed that, in the West here, we think we're at the pinnacle of civilization, 2020. But I understand in the Mahabharata, when you read it, it sounds like we are quite a bit behind civilization. You want to elaborate on that a little bit? Because it just, for the Western mind, we just can't believe we're not the greatest thing on the planet.
Why don't you start on that one, Nilesh?
Okay, do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'll make a couple of points on that. A great point, Sandy, that you mentioned. The concept, even in science, but also think of it as anthropology, is known as a linear arrow of time. So you mentioned like 2020, we think we are the most sophisticated, most technologically advanced civilization. That is a certain point of view. And in that context also, for example, Ramayana, another epic, the Greek epics, Iliad, Odyssey, Mahabharata, they become very important. What they do is, if we can put a time frame on it, it allows us to see, you just mentioned that, it allows us to see the technology, the science, the social norms of that time, and how they were different. And what we find is immediately this theory of the linear arrow of time falls off, because you will find as you go back, not necessarily always going back, but actually there were ups and downs in terms of civilizational norms. I'll just mention one and then I'll give it to Jeffrey to add on more, is that why just our times, where Sandy, you mentioned, it may feel like we are backward in some sense compared to what we read in Mahabharata. In some sense, what you read in Mahabharata, one may feel backward that particular time in comparison to Ramayana, which is even further in the past. Not on everything, sometimes the technology is better in one particular time frame, but social norms, for example, or in these days we talk about the gender equality or the freedom among the genders. It's just amazing to see what you see in say Ramayana times versus Mahabharata times. So there is a difference when you look at the weapons that are used. Now, all that is survived with us is the descriptions for most part. But if you just look at the descriptions and even compare with some of the sophisticated weapons we have today, we can see the similarity, but also the interesting differences.
With all respect to all cultures, is always the way the Vedic civilization begins. I think a little context is important. The Mahabharata, as an epic, it is an epic story, was intended to put a frame around all of us as on a grand adventure. Just like when we say namaste, we're not praying or asking for something. We're looking at each other with a tremendous sense of admiration and respect, because we're all on the same journey, and we're hoping that our relationships will stay in balance and stay in harmony so that we can get the best from this. So let's say that every culture has a contribution to make. Every religion, every civilization, every tribe, every place, rather than going in with preconceived notions about who they are, in terms of the content. If we go in knowing that they're amazing immortal beings, which is the Vedic vision, the yogic vision, and if we're open to hear what they've been given, this is a formula for building good relationships with all civilizations. And we stay in an attitude of mutual respect. So in many ways, Nilesh and myself and people like us are just trying to bring these stories forward because they haven't been brought forward and because they have important contributions to make. So it's important not to think of this as a kind of nationalism or culturism or anything motivated like that. It's a truth-seeking enterprise, beneficial for all of us, and we will take from it what we want. None of it will be forced. So with that, back to you.
So I'll add few things to what Jeffrey said. And, I noticed when I start talking about the Mahabharata, especially in the context of the dating, I seems to become more a history person than, there are many more aspects to history. In fact, the Sanskrit word is itihasa, iti ha asa, and literally means that's how it happened. Iti ha asa. But itihasa has many more aspects than the history, because history might simply get stuck into the dates and specific events, who met with who killed who, and who became the king, and so on and so forth. So in the 2 rounds that we did, Jeffrey kept on bringing back the subject that these epics are full of knowledge. And for example, for this very epic that Vyasa wrote as an author, I may mention a long name. The short name would be a good one to use, Vyasa, in the sense of also a guru. In fact, when I noticed, and I know Jeffrey does this, the Vyasa Purnima or a Guru Purnima that's coming shortly in a couple of months or 1 month's time. And that's actually, it's also called Vyasa Purnima because the author of this book attained such a status of like a universal guru. His name is a long one, Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. The Krishna, because he was dark skinned, that's just like the Krishna that we know. Dvaipayana, because he was born on the island, okay, between the Yamuna river and that area. And then the Vyasa, because the Mahabharata is so huge, so vast, and that's what the Vyasa also means, like a guru, big. So that's one aspect. But the compliment that he received is what I want to mention in the context of the knowledge that this contains. He is described as someone who did what? Again, just a Sanskrit line, Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha. So he has basically put a flame of knowledge. And that's what this Mahabharata text is really about. So yes, it's a history, but it is much more than a history, and therefore itihasa.
And one thing to add to that, so that everyone hears it in the soft way that it is presented by the Vedic culture, is that just as civilizations have the experience of the divine descending to them in various ways throughout their histories, so one of the things that makes India, Bharata, a unique civilization is that, according to their records, within memory, twice in their remembered history, in that itihasa, the supreme being, whom everyone addresses in different ways, made a descent to Bharat, stayed on the ground for quite a long time, and left behind in the Sanskrit language a very precise and enduring language, the account of their coming, their relationships with the humans, their purpose for coming, and our purpose for existing. So the information they left behind, and they were called avatara, ava, to descend, tara, to heal and restore, or you could say to remind and refresh, to give us encouragement on our journey here, rather than, it is a difficult journey. We should respect each other for that. We all know each thing we do here takes great courage and effort. So this respect in the context of a great visit with wisdom that could be very valuable is the context that makes the astronomy, the when and why and how of these manifestations so important. And Nilesh is playing an important role in helping us to understand those historical moments.
I think it's interesting too that this epic that's over 5,000 years old had astronomical text in it, which when the British went over, they just found that, well, they didn't even understand it. And yet you today took modern technology, and I understand you backdated it with computers to actually prove that these astronomical texts were in fact correct. Is that how you did that?
Yes, that is correct. I'll briefly mention to Sandy what you just said. In fact, the one specific astronomy reference that I came across from the Mahabharata text. So I was reading Bhagavad Gita, I was reading some parts of Mahabharata, but mostly Bhagavad Gita. And this whole journey, although I grew up in India and I came to Canada for doing my master's, this journey of this book, you know, when did the Mahabharata War happen? It began in Canada, not far from Vancouver, Edmonton, you know, the cold Edmonton. And so this one particular verse is very important. There are 300 plus different astronomy observations. But to your point, Sandy, what you just said, that when the British came and they looked at this and they said, this doesn't make sense. What kind of stuff is this? This one particular verse, among others, they used to actually make a point that, you know, the Indians are clueless about astronomy. Right. And this verse is very revolutionary. And, you know, it became a revolutionary for my work. And that's not the reason why I started, because they said something. In fact, I did not know that. The verse I'll just briefly mention is that most of the listeners may be aware of. If not, we can go through it, but may be aware of what is the big bear in the sky, or it's called, you know, the pan and handle. You know, there are like 4 stars in a rectangular frame in the northern direction. At night, one may observe, and then there are 3 stars in the tail or a handle. You know,
Big Dipper, we call it.
A dipper, yeah, Big Dipper, right? Yeah, and so Big Dipper, like a big bear, kind of shown a big one, but the 7 prominent stars of the Big Dipper. So in the handle, there are 3 stars, and the middle one that you can easily see is the Vasishtha, or in the modern astronomy is the Mizar. And next to that, there is a very small star. If you have a very good eyesight, 20/20, you can easily see it. If not, with a little bit of binoculars, you can do that. Is called Arundhati, or in the modern astronomy called Alcor. And the astronomy reference from the Mahabharata is this, that at the time of the war, this Vyasa is telling another individual, the king, one of the king of that time, he said, look, try your best to stop the war. The war is not good. Try your best to stop the war. I am seeing all kinds of bad signs. And one of the things among the list of bad signs he mentions that this Arundhati star is walking. It appears in the sky, the way they move, you know, from night to day and night. It appears to be, or it is walking ahead of Vasishtha, ahead of the other big star. And why is this big deal? Because if you look at in the sky today, that is exactly the opposite. The Mizar is walking ahead of Alcor, or Vasishtha is walking ahead of Arundhati. And if you go back 1,000 years or 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 4,000 years, or even 6,000 years, it's still the Vasishtha walking ahead of Arundhati. But at the time of Mahabharata War, the situation described is exactly opposite. And so British used observation like this to make a claim that, look at these guys, this is practically, astronomically, scientifically, it's impossible.
Because they couldn't think past 2000.
They couldn't, yeah, they didn't know how to go back. That's one, from astronomy science perspective, but they didn't even think of going that far back. Right. Because to them, the civilization didn't go that far back.
This is a very important thing for all of us to understand. So I'm going to emphasize the Greek and the Roman civilization. Again, we know a fair amount about many of their contributions and the literatures they left. And we also know now, from a scholarly perspective, that a lot of European languages, perhaps 60 to 70% of them, are beholden to Greek and Latin for their own languages. You could say that they're dialects of Greek and Latin. But what has only come forward in the last few years, to be very, very clear, is that Sanskrit is the mother language behind both Greek and Latin, meaning that Sanskrit existed first and that Greek and Latin are dialects of Sanskrit. And this has been proven by linguists, by etymologists to be the case. Sometimes they call this the Indo-European language because they don't want to give credit to India that it is Sanskrit. But nobody knows where Sanskrit came from originally, except that it is the primary language of the culture that we call India. And the Vedic literature, the whole library of knowledge, is written in the Sanskrit language in such a way that it has had a continuity over time, that it has lasted for a very long time and been kept meticulously as a record. So what all of this puts us on the brink of is looking at history in a longer way than we've done in the past. And science has come from the mathematics that supposedly by our culture came from the Greeks and Romans. But I just want to point something out to you. If you know Roman numerals, X, V, I, try doing mathematics with Roman numerals. Try making a computer. I hear one engineer started trying 10 years ago and he's still trying to get it to work. But Roman numerals make it really impossible. You wouldn't even like your grocery list in Roman numerals. Now, the second is the Greeks actually hated the concept of zero. They didn't just dislike it, they avoided it like the plague. And this is the ones and zeros is what made computers possible, binary mathematics. Without the concept of zero, then the mathematics that made technology as we know it now possible would not exist. So both of those concepts, advanced mathematics, zero, and a numeracy system that is very sophisticated are again now proven to have been originated in India and colonized into modern academics during that time without giving credit where it was due. To you, Nilesh.
All right. No, that's a great point. And I should mention, as much as I knew as a hearsay, the connection of Sanskrit to Latin and whatnot, especially after I came in contact with Jeffrey, that was a few years ago. And, I have had a pleasure of listening to him sometime one-on-one, many times one-on-one. And then this whole history, and he would just ask me to randomly take any word, and then he will tell me the Sanskrit root of that word. What that has affected me, I should say, in a positive way, is I always used to only look at the Sanskrit English dictionary or maybe English dictionary. Now, every time I come across a new word for whatever reason, my research, I go to etymology dictionary. And, I have to just go a few steps, and then usually that will end up with Latin, or they might say pi, which is imaginary, imagined language, not imaginary, imaginary language. But that really helps because the root that they will give is usually give me the clue. I mean, I say, okay, I know that word, that's a Sanskrit root. And then, I can play with the Sanskrit English dictionary. What he mentioned about the mathematics, and what you'll find is, so he said you cannot make a shopping list in Roman numerals and whatnot. You can't do multiplication, you can't do division very well. And the point he mentioned about the Greeks were worried about the zero. In fact, Greeks, Romans, the sort of Western European culture at that time, 500 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, they were actually very fearful of this zero. and they thought it's like magical. How can it do these things like 1,000 minus 37, and you play with these zeros and still it gives you the correct answer? So it did that.
All you have to say is, if you don't believe in zero, how many people's bank account often goes below zero?
That's right. And that's very, by the way, unless that mathematics existed, the kind of sophisticated astronomy that is possible now as a modern astronomy, but the sophisticated astronomy that became possible in India is very much because of zero and the mathematics. And I will not change the subject from Mahabharata, but just to mention, I presented a couple of years ago at one of the Oxford conference on the Surya Siddhanta. I don't want to change gears, but it's a Indian astronomy text, very much revered, very much valued around the world. It also had a similar story that people thought this is impossible. I mean, when the British went there, by the way, they were very interested in taking everything that they could find. In a hurry, they translated everything that they could find. So in a way, they had a confidence that this is useful. But as Jeffrey said, when it came to giving a credit where it is due, they did not want to give the credit. But just like the just like Mahabharata or Ramayana, and based on the astronomy observations, you can go back and find out the time. You can also do that same thing for the purely astronomy text, like Surya Siddhanta. And the one paper that I just presented in Oxford, I think a couple of years ago, what I showed there is that there are 3 references. So in mathematics, we say we needed 2 points to define a line, at least 2 points, it defines a straight line. If you have 3 points, it can define a curve. So not because of that, it just so happened that we can find 3 independent references from that Surya Siddhanta. And mathematically, when you want to put it together as a jigsaw puzzle, the only time those 3 references can come together, it goes back to 12,000 BCE. That's 14,000 years ago.
Now you're just making that up now.
No, fortunately, I mean, those of course you know that, but those of who are listening to it, the video, my presentation at Oxford, it's there, but it's not the best presentation. I presented it again, and if you guys are, those of you who might be interested, if you type just my name, Nilesh Oak, and Surya Siddhanta or something like this, you'll get a 30-minute video, and it walks you through that 12,000 BC.
All right.
Thank you. I'd like to also point out that there's a Carl Sagan video everyone should see.
Yeah.
And it shows him walking in a Shiva temple. And he's in the midst of about 100 on the ground Shiva lingas. The stone that's in a cylindrical shape is rolled that way in the rivers in India, in the Narmada and others. So he's walking around and talking and giving credit to India. He says, only India has a civilization that calculated the age of the universe in billions of years. And then he says, of course, they must have done that by coincidence. Now, this is, once again, it just shows this lack of understanding. He was quite sincere because he was giving credit that the first culture to think billions of years was India. But the research was so hidden and obscured by colonization that even he, hoping to know, could only know a little bit because the knowledge was still in obscurity. So let's add one piece to this. The difference between Western civilization, the rest of the world's, most of the world's civilizations, at least the ones that believe we only exist for one lifetime, and the civilization of India, is that it's based on the notion that we're on a long, epic journey, that we chose to go on that journey, that we're not evil for making that choice, that we're immortal beings, that we can't die, and that we're on that journey to gather experience, to do unusual, astounding, incredible things, to come here and have the whole experience. And therefore, the epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, are grounded in this longer view of existence that uses immortality, not any material construct, as the backdrop. Whereas our civilization is a one lifetime, use once, throw away civilization. And we're treating the planet that way, we're treating each other that way. We're very disrespectful, we're very sectarian, we're very domineering. We're not acting like tourists on a long journey going to amazing places and keeping the planet beautiful. So it's important you know that this conversation and Nilesh's work and the work that I've been doing in linguistics is all about reestablishing this wider context of our existence because of these important historical truths. So we change the way we look at each other, and then we'll change the way we solve the problem. To you, Nilesh.
Okay, and so taking from there, the wider application of it, I want to make 3 points. One is quickly summarize for everyone what is the, I talked about the astronomy observations, but what is the timing of Mahabharata? So I'll quickly mention that. What is the time of Ramayana? But then I also want to relate to, as we go back in the past, some of these barriers that we have created, the nationalistic barriers, the border barriers, sometimes the barriers of a language and culture. And I'm sure there were different languages and different cultures, but those barriers, as we go back in the past, were less and less. And actually, through the help of the descriptions from Mahabharata, but also from Ramayana, you can start seeing the world connections. And I'll mention a couple, maybe after a break. But so quickly, just to summarize, my first book, when did the Mahabharata War happen? What I did is, as I said, it's a very huge book. And in course of time, I ended up reading the Mahabharata text like 30 plus times. And so I wasn't looking into anything else. It was like totally focused on anything and everything that's astronomy. If it's not, I'm not interested, because otherwise it will never be done. What I found is has close to 300, more than 300 specific astronomy descriptions, astronomy observations. And just like I mentioned that Arundhati and Vasishta, what that observation did, for example, when actually it took me 15 years to test it, 15 years to figure out, is this truly a true, it's a reality, and if it happened, when did it happen? I found there was a certain period that goes back from 4500 BCE and backwards, which means more than 6,500 years and backwards. So it told me that if that statement of Mahabharata is true, then Mahabharata War happened definitely more than 6,500 years ago. So then I took those 300 observations and started doing that as a jigsaw puzzle. And the answer came out a very specific year, believe it or not, because it's like all roads lead to Rome kind of scenario. They all pointed to one specific year, 5561 BCE. So just what does that mean? If we add 2020, that's 7,581. So I say for our lifetime, if we just say 7,500 years ago, that should be sufficient. The number wouldn't change much.
The obvious question here, without telescopes, how did they even know that these stars were in the skies? And how was astrology so well established at that time?
In fact, what you ask is absolutely, you can say, another mystery in the world. And I should add that beyond India, there were few civilizations. We call them by different civilization, but in some sense, it's the world civilization, different aspects of it. There were some other civilizations like Mayan civilization, especially Latin America, South America, Incas, Peru. There is evidence in those places also, like Egypt to an extent, that there was a advanced information about the astronomy. But so the other point that you mentioned, if there were no telescopes, then how did they do it? Again, if we read through the Mahabharata text, there is a references to mirrors in the Mahabharata, also Ramayana. And once we think of a glass or once we think of a mirror, it's not a big extension to telescopes, for example. It doesn't take much. Also, it's very important to notice that although we attach telescopes or invention or discovery, whatever you want to call of telescopes, going back to 400, 500, 600 years, actually there is enough evidence to show that there were telescope-like instruments, whatever they may be, before. And Mahabharata talks about the sukshma drishti. It talks about germs. So corona, I mean, the very reason why we are sitting in the house, and it was Yoga Vasishta. That's another great philosophical text related to Vasishta telling Rama. And there are descriptions, the sizes are given for living entities. And because it starts with a human being or a size of a bull, if you go down, just like you can go down in time, you can also go down in size. And so they had an awareness of it. We don't know how it is. But let me just quickly summarize the Ramayana one. I did the ditto, same thing for Valmiki Ramayana. It's much smaller compared to Mahabharata, 24,000 verses. And to my surprise, I found close to 600 astronomy descriptions, astronomy references, even more than Mahabharata. And when I put those together, it takes me to a very specific year or specific time frame, 13th millennium BCE. So that's 12,209 BCE, very, very specific year. Actually, I won't go into that, but very specific days for specific events. You can actually estimate that. So that, that just tells you right there 14,000 years of history. And I'll take my break. I'll give back to Jeffrey. But the point I want to mention is the Ramayana times has some connections with as far as South America. And I'll come back to that when Jeffrey, you add your thoughts.
Boy, I don't want you to stop talking. Just keep telling me more. So to add something important to this conversation, Nilesh and I came to the same subject from two different directions. He, as a scientist in the sense of pursuing the relationships within matter to understand what they're teaching us and telling us. And in Indian culture, there's a purposefulness that is obvious to everyone in the arrangement of the laws of nature that hasn't been recognized by all thinkers. But because that purposefulness is there, a second subject is also tied to astronomy and mathematics. And that is the one that I've pursued for 50 years now, and that's astrology. Because our movement through time within matter is coincided by these changing patterns around us. So the reason that these two great and important epics included all of these astronomical references was they had a twofold way of looking at them. One, they wanted you to look at the greater cosmic clock and know what time it was, because that was an important mark of what was happening when. But they also knew that whatever was happening in the sky at any time, and the Sanskrit is yata pinde, tata brahmande. When there are movements in the big world around us, they have an effect upon the small molecular worlds inside of us, because all of those particles are related to those other particles. The whole thing is connected. So therefore, the view of karma is that cause and effect is not only active in one life, but that we're a work in progress and we go from life to life, continuing something we were doing before and receiving cause and effect that we had put in motion before. So this is where karma has a twofold meaning: cause and effect in science, and a continuity for the Atma, for the immortal being on their journey. To you, Nilesh.
All right. And talking of the karma and the reincarnation and how we take forms and purify ourselves and get better, technologically improvise ourselves, we can say. Not the materialistic technology, but the spiritual technology as well. These both epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana, in a very entertaining way. So yes, there is this big war is happening in one place, but right in that middle of this war, for example, Bhagavad Gita, this dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, is happening right on that battlefield, just before the war began. So it just sets the stage for the war. And the rest of the Mahabharata text, in a very entertaining way, it educates us on dharma, artha, kama, moksha. It's a very entertaining way that it does it right in the middle of the war. But just like in modern movies, you would find there a lot of exciting fighting going on, and then some relaxed scene, for people to regroup themselves when they are ready for the next adventure. And it does.
Jeffrey always calls it a great class or a great movie on the psychological characters available on the planet. Everybody is there.
Yes,
to
yes,
study.
yes. And Vasa mentions, I mentioned first thing is he's putting a flame of a knowledge. And then Vasa also mentions what's the objective of it. He said you might, for your um, entertainment, you may go to different things, and that's perfectly fine. But he said if you're looking for different aspects of entertainment, they're all there in this text. That's how he claims. He says dharma arthascha kamascha sadharma kimna sevyate. So dharma, artha, kama, it's all there. The enjoyment, the dharma, the dhruti, that's there. Artha in the two sense, finding the meaning in life, but also finding wealth, finding necessities. That's all there. How to get those, how to retain those, everything is there only if you read this.
That's really important, Nilesh. Thank you. Because if we add one thing to that, during the time of colonization, many times the people who were stealing from another culture inherently knew that that was not a very nice thing to do. I mean, you can't help but do it. So it was both an embarrassment to some of their writers and artists and culture, and for other people, it was an entrepreneurial opportunity that they couldn't let go of. So they exploited. Mm-hmm. But if you think about the larger journey of everyone, don't think for a moment that they are their skin. Think that everything we do in one life, the scene changes and the set changes, the skin changes, the context changes, our gender changes, we come back again. I believe Shakespeare talked about this, and he said, all the world's a stage. And the men and women are merely players, and they have entrances and exits. So it's very important to understand that the Mahabharata and Ramayana are trying to create a big context for us to see ourselves, almost like a grown-up worldview, rather than a small microscopic worldview. And so they want us to see each other in this long game, rather than just one little short, competitive, ugly fighting game. So it is also important to know that we use the word war, but modern war kills citizens and civilians, and neither of those epics were interested in doing that. Especially the Mahabharata was just a group of warriors on a football field, on a soccer field, if you will, and the farmers a quarter of a mile away were not in danger. So we also have to watch our vocabulary so we know that this was not a huge, despicable war. It was a political process because some people have a temperament to use power, and we have to manage that in society.
You said it very well, Jeffrey, that some people have a temperament and that needs to be managed. I'm not sure if you have heard about it. I'm sure, Jeffrey, you would have, but for benefit of everyone, in Papua New Guinea, those societies, some of the groups that did not come in contact with rest of the world for a long time, when their practices were observed. Now, this one is something not very proud moment for the men who are listening to it, but what there would happen is in that society or that area, men don't do much. Now, I'm sure the ladies here would agree that that's also true here. But so the men are sitting, ladies are doing most of the job, but then men get restless. And so what they would do, and this happens, I mean, you can see those documentaries, is that the two different tribes nearby area, men says, I'm too tired just sitting here. So actually they wear the mask, paint their faces, and then they go and do the fight. And the fight continues until once someone is either injured or actually, unfortunately, sometime dead. That's when this fighting stops. And there was no reason to fight other than that they were bored. So just taking that point. But also the other point that you mentioned is that these texts are giving a very broader viewpoint. It's not limited to India. In fact, when I give lectures in India and during the question answer, they might say, okay, so we do this, but they do something, by they referring to the Western world or Europeans or something like this. And I say, well, what are we talking? Are we talking the India, 2020 or whatever it is? If not, as we go back to Mahabharata times, actually, or Ramayana times, I tell them, there is no us versus them. There are no these borders that we see now, but beyond borders, actually Mahabharata, if you look at it geographically, the different parties that came to play this game, if you want to call it, Jeffrey, they came from as far as what we would call, say, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. That area was called Uttara Kuru, the same Kuru name that attaches to Kauravas and Pandavas. And then then all of India, now the Myanmar and Bangladesh, and of course Pakistan was not there, Nepal, Tibet, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, these warriors, and even the Malay and parts of Eastern Africa, the warriors came from all over to play this great game, as Jeffrey put it, a football on the football field.
Yes.
Actually, did you speak at the Mahabharata conference when it's held once a year? I think they hold it in December.
In Kurukshetra.
Kurukshetra. Yeah, they do it under Saraswati, river Saraswati, and research related to Saraswati. And I did speak. I did speak at multiple Mahabharata conferences or related to chronology. If I may mention, I wanted to quickly talk about the connection of India or the Ramayana times all the way to South America. For example, Sugriva, when they are searching for Sita, Rama's wife, who has been taken away by Ravana. And Sugriva is like a geography, professor of geography, you can say, knows the world, pretty much he knew 70-80% of the world that we know today, the way he describes it. So right from India as a center, he divided this search party into 4. Sent one in north direction, another in the south, one in the west, and one in the east. Now, the south side party is the one who found out where Sita is. But I want to take you in a minute in the east direction. So starting from India, they're going towards, imagine as Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Polynesia, and all that. And of course, these names are not used. Now, for Thailand, it's the Raupyadip, the land of silver. And Indonesia, it's the Yawadvip, that Yawa became Java, the one Java that we have today. And it gives the descriptions that we can match even today, all the way to the west coast of Chile and Peru. That's how we have the descriptions, So from in terms of geography, in terms of the birds, animals, and some of the structures that are described in Ramayana, you can see in Peru even to this day.
Now, wouldn't some of those continents be closer as well at that time?
We are for Ramayana, we're talking, say, 14,000 years ago. And that in 14,000 years ago, essentially the geography was as we see it today. So not a huge difference.
I would say that Ramayana is much older than that, like millions of years.
Okay, so I can address that. So for example, beyond Valmiki Ramayana, like when you get into the Puranas, and I don't know if you our audience here, if they're familiar with the word Purana.
Some
our students are.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another literature, another history books, but it's not as precise sometimes it is very precise, but at times it's not as precise as it is in Ramayana or Mahabharata, because they are collecting whatever they know and putting it together. So sometimes in Purana, you see these descriptions of what, Sandy, you are referring to, like Ramayana happening many millions of years ago and so on. But if we go with just the evidence from Valmiki Ramayana, and I don't mean just the astronomy evidence. In fact, the evidence for the rivers, the hydrology, geology, geophysics, and whatnot, actually it tells us that the Ramayana couldn't have happened more than 50,000 years ago. Because the way we want the rivers as described in Ramayana They simply did not exist. Now our modern science tells us before 50,000 years ago.
That's important. I think I'll add one little astronomical note to this and see where it takes us. So at the beginning, you heard Nilesh say that the stars of the Big Dipper changed their relationship to each other. You might have been wondering how fixed stars, so-called, can do that. And this is the basic truth of astrology as well. So it's the same principle. There are several motions of our planet. It's inclined on its axis, 23 and some change degrees. And the pole of our Earth is actually acting in such a way that it wobbles the way a gyroscope does. The combined motions of the Earth, the Sun, the Moon, the solar system, all are part of a wobble that takes a precise amount of time for one to occur. Imagine our planet having a pencil in the North Pole with its point up, and it takes a certain amount of time for that pencil to draw a circle in the sky above our planet.
Like this.
It actually takes 25,920 years for the Earth to make one of those wobbles. That means each subsection is 2,160 years, which is 12, the number of signs in the zodiac, divided into that larger number. Those are called ages. And an age has to do with what group of stars is with the sun when it is rising on the first day of spring in the east. What stars is it with? And anyone who knows about this precession of the equinoxes, as it's called, knows that this wobble divides time up into natural astronomical sections. And this mathematics and this wobble have been well understood by the Vedic culture for a very long time. Nilesh, I'll hand it back to you.
I could put in the, do you want me to put in the ages? I've got that text here of the yugas. Do you want me to?
You could.
You might want to go to Jeffrey's book here as well. I'll give him a plug on this book. You can order it on Amazon. But I'll just put in the dates for the
duration of years for the Yuga cycles.
Yuga cycles. Let me just see.
But just let's say also that these are larger astronomical time periods envisioned by the Vedic sages, which extend out into the cosmos. But Nilesh's point was, due to that wobble, over long periods of time, these two stars changed in relation to each other. You want to elaborate a little bit, Nilesh?
Yes. So actually what Jeffrey just told you, and you can go back and go to YouTube and just type precession of the equinoxes or precession of the Earth's axis, and it will tell you more or reinforce the concept. That one particular principle, that what just Jeffrey told you, is the basis, is the fundamental basis. You can call like a Newton's laws, you can call, or just like kapha vata pitta, the gravity and thermodynamics and the electromagnetism metaphor of last session, that we heard, is the basis for my 25 plus years of work. So in fact, I just have two books with me here. The Mahabharata, this is on Ramayana. There's another book on certain aspects of Mahabharata. They all have this precession of the equinoxes or the precession of the Earth's axis as the basis.
Don't tell Western astrologers that, eh?
Yes, and so when the Earth's axis is pointing towards in some part of the sky, if there is a bright star, we call that the pole star for that time. Right now in our times, it's Polaris. But as Jeffrey mentioned, it goes through this complete wobble, a whole circle, and that takes, I'm going to use the approximate number. I'll call it 26,000 years for simplicity, 25,000, whatever that number comes to. So it's that 26,000 year cycle, which means if it's here right now, if you go halfway to 13,000, it's going to point in this direction. Actually, that was the timing of Ramayana. It just so happens that way. And that time, the pole star was not Polaris because, it's a halfway different direction. But the pole star of that time was the brightest star that we have in the northern hemisphere in that polar region. It's the Vega, which is used in astronomy as a reference star for the magnitude. It is given the number of 0, and from there you go high or lower. In Sanskrit literature, both Mahabharata, also Ramayana, it's called Brahma Rashi, because each of the nakshatra, the 27 nakshatra instead of 12 zodiacs, the same landscape, just divided into 27 instead of 12. And each of that nakshatra has a deity attached to it. And so this particular star, Brahma, is the deity. That's why it's called Brahma Rashi. And what's beautiful thing about Ramayana is Ramayana describes the pole star of that time. It says Brahma Rashir Vishuddhasya, Brahma Rashi, that's the pole star. Brahma Rashir Vishuddhasya, it has settled. Shuddhasya Paramarshaya, those Paramarshaya are your Big Dipper, by the way. And so Big Dipper is going around that pole star. That's what we see in the sky. Shuddhasya Paramarshaya Archishmanta Prakashante Dhruvam Sarve Pradakshinam. So this just one reference out of 600 from Ramayana. If you understand, immediately it tells you that the Ramayana has to happen sometime between 10,000 BC to 14,000 BC.
Absolutely.
I find that just so amazing, because you're talking about knowledge that you're claiming is at least 14,000 years old. And most people today have no clue about these numbers, or that they're possible, or we're not even looking at the sky to see what sign the moon is. And we're totally void of this knowledge right now.
This is an important concept. It's called moksha or mukti. And I'll have Nilesh talk about it a little bit, but what it means is that some things bind us up, put us in a box, limit us, make us small. Other ideas make us broader minded, give us a more adventuresome spirit, a bigger sense of self and possibility. Would you address that a bit, Nilesh?
Yes, in a couple of ways I'll do it. One I will do to talk about in a mysterious fashion. For example, you talked about this wobbling motion. When I took my chemistry undergrad courses, I'm a chemical engineer, as Sandy mentioned, by profession. And all these infrared spectroscopy, all that you do actually is based on the principle of the spin of the atom, spin of the electrons, and all spin. And to sustain, like to exist, everything has to keep on moving. That's the common principle, right from the atom, electron, all the way to the planets, to the sun, and everyone. They have to continue to spin if they want to exist. So that's kind of the common thing that it brings. Now, the point you mentioned about the moksha, I'm going to say this. I mean, this is the statement said by Varaha Mihir. He was one of the great Indian astronomers. They are around 2,000 years or 2,500 years old, not that long ago. When you look at 7,000 and 14,000 and 21,000. He said he was so fascinated, and actually, as you study these scriptures, it occurs to you more and more is this principle. Maybe partly I am biased because I worked in astronomy a lot in comparison to other subjects, but it really dawns on you that how much, to what extent astronomy percolates all the epics, the Vedas, the Rigvedas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, Upanishad, Puranas, everywhere. And so I'm not surprised when I read this statement from Varaha Mihir. Now take it very lightly, as a humorously, but also you may take it seriously. He says, there is no moksha unless you are expert in astronomy. There is no moksha without knowing astronomy. That is his statement. Of course, he was very much into astronomy, and that's why he would have said that. But the bigger point is, you can take any virtuous field, any virtuous activity to the best of your ability, and which is what the Bhagavad Gita talks about, swadharma, shreyan swadharma viguna, whatever is suitable to you, and try to achieve perfection, and you don't have to worry about the moksha. It will come searching for you.
I love the story that you tell about the beggar sitting on the ground, crying, reading the Bhagavad Gita upside down, and everybody making fun.
Yeah, I would like to hear that.
Tell us, do you remember?
Well, there's a town square, a reasonable sized town, and a guru and teacher of the Vedas happens to come into the town, and he sees this person sitting in a circle of people, and he's holding a Bhagavad Gita upside down, and he's crying, and the people around him are poking fun at him and laughing at him. And the guru says, "Hey, everyone, stop for a minute. What's going on here?" And the people say, "This fool, he's so foolish. He's reading the Bhagavad Gita upside down.
He can't read.
So the guru then says he's so illiterate, he can't even read. And so then the guru says to the man who has the Gita in his hand, he says, "So, and you're crying because they're making fun of you?" He says, "Oh, no. I don't care what they say. I'm crying because I'm remembering that in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is on the field where so many people are going to leave their lives, and Krishna is loving all of them equally and cares for them, and it brings tears to my eyes." And the sadhu turns to the crowd and says, "This person understands."
Yeah. Wonderful. Very, very wonderful story. And you know, the Bhagavad Gita is a Upanishad. And when you go to other Upanishad, you hear the same story. I'll mention one sentence from it, Ishavasya Upanishad,
Yes.
where he says, if you have avidya, like ignorance, that's very bad for you. And then the next sentence, it says, if you have vidya, meaning knowledge, it is even worse. And it's said in the metaphorical sense, of course, very much like the story that you told. The true knowledge is in understanding the gist of it, you know, what's behind.
Essence of the very thing. And this is so important to these conversations about what you were saying about the concept of moksha. I was remembering that the Sanskrit for one who's very broad-minded and sees the big picture is Mahatma. It wasn't a Gandhi name. He's not the only Mahatma. It wasn't his actual name, but people were saying he's got a big-minded view. But it actually means mega in Latin, big-minded. But the opposite is duratma. And the word duress and distress come from that. It means having a small mind and being trapped inside a tiny box. And anything that traps you in small ideas, small concepts, small amount of time, small ideas, has captured you and put you in prison.
Very true.
And what's your response to that from the astronomical perspective, my friend?
From astronomical perspective, well, Sandy asked me, like, without the telescopes, how can you see things, you know? And again, the beyond the moksha, what this astronomy, but that's true for any field. I'm just biased towards astronomy. What does it tell you? Is that, you know, when you start seeing this, for example, the other day I was reading a book on tectonics, you know, the earth plates, you know, the plates and how they move and how the earth's ocean surface is rejuvenated. And actually, when we look at it, it can be initially, whether it's astronomy or whether any field where we go too deep into it, just like our human body, like, you know, how much, how sensitive it is. Like, we easily live our life, for most part, nothing happens, so we take it for granted. But the temperature range within which it needs to be maintained, and this body is amazingly doing it. But if you see what can go wrong if little bit things here and there don't work out, whether it's astronomy or a ocean floor or our human body, initially it's very scary, but then it's also very liberating after a while, you know. So for example, just the earth skin, how little thin strip that we are living on, and you know, there is that water just there, somehow held by gravity. If it goes away, we are gone, you know, we are doomed. Same thing with astronomy. All these forces that are acting on the surface, for example, the asteroids and all these things coming and hitting the earth, hitting the moon. You can see it on the surface of the moon. And by the way, the very fact we have a moon.
Coming now.
the very fact we have a moon is the protection from all the asteroids and all those things. They get diverted. So it's initially very scary, but then it's very liberating. I think that's the message I feel out of all that we do.
Well, I tell you, this could go on forever because I could just pick your brain for another couple hours, and we will. We must get you up to Vancouver again this summer.
Or centuries.
Yeah, or centuries. A few people have asked if they could ask questions. So let's just open this now to questions. So if you have a question, show me your video and I'll take you in turn. I think, let's start with Zubin. I think he had a question. You want to come on, Zubin?
Yes, although maybe you have control of my video.
Oh, I might have. I don't think so.
It says when I try to start it, host
it's
has
under
control.
my name. It's under Antonina.
Under Antonina, yeah. It says you cannot start video because host has stopped it. There we go.
There we are. Hi. Nice to see you.
Namaste. Nilesh.
Namaste.
Great to hear you speak.
From Vancouver.
It's Zubin from Vancouver. Yeah. So I had a couple of questions, and I really appreciate your astronomy background. And one is with regards to your dating of the Ramayana. When you do your calculations or from your research, do you also take into account the larger time cycles also mentioned in the Puranas, in which, is there a possibility that we could have had a same or similar alignment of the stars, zodiacs, and nakshatras if the Ramayana had took place over 1.2 million years ago, from Treta Yuga over to Dwapara Yuga, as like some lineages actually state. And do you ever go into the kalpas, the manvantaras, and then the Divya Yuga cycles?
Okay.
And
very good.
One more thing regarding, you've heard of Rama's bridge, or the British Adams Bridge, and when they did their carbon dating from the bottom of India to Lanka, like, do you have any comments about that and the older time cycle mentioned?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for a.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for a good question. I will call those both questions FAQ, frequently asked questions. I'll give a short answer because they can take hours to just answer that. So the first one, yes, I am aware of the Manvantara, Kalpa, Yugas, and the different time cycles used in Puranas, but Indic literature. In fact, Mahabharata talks of it. Ramayana also talks of Ramayana happening in Treta Yuga. But do recognize that these Yuga cycles have many definitions within the Indian knowledge system, has more than 30 plus definitions. And I'll just mention my blog name, and Sandy, you can possibly send the link afterwards. But it's simple to remember, nileshoak.wordpress.com. And if you go there and if you type Yuga, you will get a few blog articles that I have written, and you'll see these different definitions. So quickly to answer the next part of the question, which is no, I do not start with these cycles. In fact, that was Sandy's question, that some people are thinking of Ramayana happening 9 million years ago, 24 million years ago, and so on and so forth, partly based on these descriptions. But, in the scientific view, and when I say science, I don't mean just the modern science. In fact, that's another, Jeffrey, that's another gift of India, by the way, the Indian old wisdom is the science, and that's what I also talk about, but I'll not go here. So what happens is, so I looked at astronomy observation, I put them together as a jigsaw puzzle, and it gave me 12,000 BC. But beyond astronomy, there are some other things. For example, rivers. And I mentioned the descriptions of rivers, which direction they are flowing, which river is meeting which river, which one is a tributary of which river. Based on that information, we have sufficient evidence to tell us that the Valmiki Ramayana, or the Ramayana described in Valmiki Ramayana, that's the only main document we have, would not have happened anytime I said 50,000 years ago before. That's true. But we have additional evidence. It would not have happened before 40,000 years ago. It would not have happened before 22,000 years ago. It would not have happened before 13,000 years ago. This is just purely on a river descriptions. So what happens is these are the different fields of science. They give you the constraint. So for example, if you're talking something about the America, American president, we immediately know we are definitely not talking more than 400 years ago, just because we're talking American president. It's the same logical analysis that we apply. And so therefore, we don't need to go that far back. So whereas the Puranic statements, in order to understand them, and we may or may not understand, we have to go and look at the multiple definitions of a yuga. For example, there is a definition of a yuga where only 5 years makes one yuga. And some of the definitions that Jeffrey, you may be aware, but you'll enjoy from the profession that you are in, the Ayurveda part also, the psychology and whatnot. Some of the definitions of a yuga are actually action-based, nothing to do with the time. And some of the definitions of yuga are administration-based. I'll mention a couple. One is in Aitreya Brahmana, another text, a bit esoteric text. It says when you are sleeping, that's as if it's a Kali Yuga. When you get up and sit down, it's a Dwapar Yuga. When you stand up, it's a Treta Yuga. And when you start walking, it's a Satya Yuga or Kruta Yuga. Charayaveti, Charayaveti, Charayaveti. Keep walking, keep walking, keep walking. So that's a very action-oriented definition. And then the administration-oriented definition is this. Depending on the king or the administrator, how he operates the kingdom or the country or the state, accordingly, he brings a certain type of yuga. So nothing to do with a time.
Crazy.
Yes. Years ago, the National Council of English Teachers made a bumper sticker that said, "May the force be with you." So because Sanskrit is poetry as well as literal and even mathematical, there are as many as 10 or more levels of meaning to each Sanskrit verse in some of the texts. Yes. Which were a kind of linguistic showing off or a kind of layered reality like a Matrushka doll, that there are multiple meanings embedded in this, and you have to know which floor of the skyscraper you're on. Level 4 is this, level 5 is this, level 6 is this. We're not used to such complex metaphorical languaging.
Right, but the question was good, and that's a very frequently asked question.
All right, thank you so much. I think Rosario had a question. Are you ready, Rosario?
I'm ready.
Put your video on.
Yes. Yep. Hi. I have my question for Nilesh. My question is about the Ramayana age. Did you know any correlation between the elephant for tusk that is being mentioned, and how is it possible? Because archaeologists says like the kind of elephant is dead. So another reference too. How do you assemble this information? What do you find out?
Okay. Great question. And this is also a frequently asked question. And my apologies, I forgot to answer the second question that the other person asked. I'll give it briefly. He asked me about the Rama's bridge, for example. Let's give the credit where it is due. Now, Rama has done a lot of wonderful things. Rama doesn't need additional credit to his name. Both in the Ramayana as well as in the Mahabharata, because Mahabharata also mentions the bridge, that bridge from Ramayana. It's called a Nala bridge, Nala's bridge, Nala Setu. There was one of the Vanara, very powerful architect, and he built the bridge. So both epics refer to it as not Rama's bridge, Nala bridge. And actually in these days, Adam's bridge, these days it turned to Adam's bridge. But anyways, that's a very last 100 years. Now, the question on the elephant, let me give a quick background. There are 2 or 3 instances in Valmiki Ramayana, very beautiful, by the way, and that's why we should listen to, I mean, read this text, it refers to, in fact, when Hanuman, the devotee of Rama, goes in search of Sita to Lanka, he finds next to the Pushpak Viman, and I'm sure somebody's going to ask about the aeroplane Pushpak, but next to that, he finds that the Pushpak Viman, the aeroplane, is protected by elephants, or let's call it elephants-like creatures. And that's not surprise. But what is surprising is the description says those elephants had 2, 3, or 4 tusks. Okay, and that's, I think, where his question is coming from. And there are a couple other instances, I'll not go there. To answer your question, there were creatures like that with 3 or 4 tusks. Okay, those are called what? You might know the name for those. Those are found around the world, but not now. Okay, so they were found long time ago, like 9 million years ago they existed. And some people use that reference to say, oh, because there were 4 tusked elephant-like creatures 9 million years ago, therefore Ramayana might have happened 9 million years ago. Okay, initially sounds good, but there is a logical flaw in this. Okay, that may be a corroborative evidence, but that's not a guarantee. Now, the modern evidence that we have, a beautiful evidence, comes from all around the world. Again, one talk I gave very recently, maybe a few months ago, at Purdue University in Indiana. And if you go to YouTube and type Nilesh Oak again, Purdue University, you will find that talk. Untold Mysteries of Hindu Civilization, or something like this. But quickly, to answer your question, those creatures, elephant-like creatures, okay, they are called, the particular variety is called Gompothere, Gompothere, okay, Gompothere. They had up to 4 tusks. And they existed, and they're found in the fossilized records all the way up to 9000 BC. They are found around the world. They are found in South America. They are found in North America. They are found in Asia. Not so much in India as of today, fossilized records, but in Thailand, Indonesia, and so on. So Ravana can bring from Thailand if required.
Just a side comment also. Remember that these are leelas, that when the avatar comes down, they could do anything they want and they don't have to leave a trace behind.
Right.
So the story, you can't impose on them and say, you can't do the following. There's no evidence. So we have to remember that it stretches our imagination beyond a certain point. The other comment is there were the 2 Mayan First Nations, indigenous looking people are standing there. One's holding a circular calendar, and he says to the other one, this will really drive them crazy. I ended the calendar in 2013.
Yeah.
So there's so many mysteries that we can't critique the greater wisdom because mysteries remain, because that is a negative form of thinking and it goes against the mukti, the moksha. But get liberated to the extent you can and keep your questions and keep them all together and live with paradoxes the Vedic way.
All right, thank you. We have one more question from Diane, I think. Are you ready, Diane? Diane or Alan Robertson?
Thank you for your talk today. I have a sense that even if truth smacked you in the face, some people wouldn't get it. So I'm wondering what kind of reception you've had to your work, and then how do you talk to cynics and skeptics, and how do you make the connection between your work and what you've put out there and contemporary culture?
Okay, great question, or great couple of questions there. I would say as overall, I had a great reception. Not immediately, like I published my first book in 2011. And for the first 5 years, I literally heard nothing, just nothing, and that didn't bother me because in fact, I'll tell you, I don't feel like I wrote these books, although I wrote it, they were written, they were somehow got it done through me, I remember writing it, I remember researching it, but it was, being in the zone, if we know this language, it's like
Truth, your wife did all the work.
Yes, and in fact, you know, there was a specific time came, and they suddenly become, you can say, popular, and so as a reception, huge. I mean, amazingly great reception through all sections. Now, to your point, you can't expect everyone to understand it. In fact, they are very technical, but I don't think that the technicality is the issue. I know people who are in 8th grade, you know, 8th class, 9th grade, and so on, and they understand it. There are people who have no technical background, they understand it. It's not easy read by no means. I did not know how to write a book. I never thought I'm a sales guy, you know, I never thought I would write a book in my life, you know. And so now I wrote 3 and I'm writing the 4th one. So good reception. And then there are these people who, no matter what, as you described very well, just don't want to understand it. And that's perfectly fine. Fortunately, we have what, 7-8 billion people on this planet. And but I want to make another important point, which is if you have heard the name of a great scientist, scientist from India, Professor E.C.G. Sudarshan. I mean, he should have won 2 Nobel Prizes in physics, because for his work, somebody else won the prize twice. And it's been admitted by likes of Richard Feynman that, you know, he should have won it and things like that. But what he said is, when you make a discovery, when you make an invention, you know, usually many people will think you must be very excited and oh my God, what did I achieve? But honestly, you don't get that feeling. You get this feeling of a blessing, and you get the feeling of being a content and almost unbelievability that did this really happen? I mean, what I discovered, is this really true? And you know, you start even doubting yourself for a while anyways. So great reception. And suddenly something happened in 2016. Actually, that's when I met Jeffrey. So Jeffrey must be partial cause, you know. Yeah, and then I have never seen it back. I don't want to go to conferences now, you know. I get so many invitations. I cannot go, or I don't want to go.
You have to come to Kurukshetra next year, because we're hoping to launch our Bhagavad Gita there.
Okay.
So we'd love to have your research there as well.
But I did hear that the series at the Vatican has been postponed, but not to worry, because the word Vatican comes from the word Vedic. So, but some people aren't ready to hear certain things yet. And this is important to understand. We don't, as Vedic practitioners, think that everyone has to. We're just grateful for everyone who's paying attention and does actually hear and see. The rest are on their own timetable, and that's also okay.
Yeah.
All right, do we have another question? I see Christina's typed one in here. Do you want to ask it, Christina? Ireland? Christine, Ireland, yeah?
Hi. Yeah, I just said, so how does all this knowledge of the when, what, and where, as we're in the Kali Yuga, help us now to have a more evolved response and an impact in the world today? And how do we keep our men from getting bored? And then, which you mentioned.
Yes, yes.
And then I said, is Bill Gates the king of the current yuga?
Right.
Thank
Okay,
you.
great question. So if everyone could hear that, you know, how do we keep the men busy? Just like the Papua New Guinea, you know. It's a life, you know, our temporary or a transition existence on this material platform, you know, it has a purpose. It has a purpose. Even our existence has a purpose, which means we have not attained a perfection. So that can come in different aspects, you know. So we have to choose something that is to our taste, you know. It's very important. So it becomes easy to live our life, you know. But once we decide a field for our practice, I mean, you know, just like a marga for a moksha, and maybe Jeffrey can talk more about it, but there is a jnana marga, and there is a bhakti marga, and there is a yoga marga. We have to select what suits us and then go after it. So Jeffrey, you want to add something in answering her?
Yes, and with that, I'll bring us to a close, and Sandy will as well. Nilesh, it's been so exciting to have you with us today. I hope we do this again. And I'm one of your great fans. As far as I'm concerned, the clarity and precision. When you read his books, he is such a rigorous thinker that you see how beautiful it is when someone's mind is just crystal clear and staying exactly on the topic. And so it's been wonderful to have you with us today. This is a part of a larger renaissance that is taking place of this ancient Sanskrit knowledge that landed in India and belongs to everyone. Some people will find it exciting, some will be threatened by it. I think we can hope that the men of the world will realize that if they try to get too rough, the whole planet will be destroyed. We may just be able to convince them to play sports rather than kill everyone. So let's try to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Nilesh. I hope that we can have you back again. People are commenting that they could talk to you much longer than this, and we've already been an hour and a half,
Yes.
and I do want to have you back again, if you don't mind.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you, Sandy and Jeffrey. It's always a pleasure. And thank you, everyone who could join today and enjoy this conversation.
I just want to mention that next week as well, we're having Gina Salal on. She's a beautiful bhakti singer. I know most of our guests have been men, but I think Laura Plum was on last week. She was very popular. If you haven't back-ordered that one, please do. So next week, Gina Salal, she's a vocalist, composer, chant leader. She sings in 23 languages, and she was the lead singer for Cirque du Soleil for many years. She's been our kirtan wala at two of our retreats already, and she's just a lady we absolutely adore. She has so much heart, and when you hear her voice, it just opens the bhakti in your heart. And she teaches sound schools, and she's from Seattle, but she's traveling quite a bit. So we're very lucky to have her for the next Wednesday. Now, I want to remind everybody to please register for this Sunday's, our monthly class on the website, jeffreyarmstrong.com. This particular Sunday, we're actually going to talk on the Mahabharata, and Jeffrey's going to give an overview of the Mahabharata and initiate you into some of the deeper hidden meanings of the Mahabharata. I know it sounds like a fantastic story sometimes, but I like to think of it as if it's in a way you could say nursery rhymes that you never forget. The stories are meant to bring an emotion into your life so that when you meditate upon it or when you chant the mantras that go with some of these things, the emotion carries you to your devotion. And knowing what these stories really mean on a deeper level is very important, and you only get that from an initiating guru, not from just reading the book. So it starts at 7 till 9 next Sunday. Please register. There's a nominal charge, and you will get the recording. Everyone gets the recording afterwards, so you can have it for your Vedic library. If you'd like a copy of this one, it will be in your Vedic library tomorrow. You can download it. The sound will be superb, I can guarantee you. Thank you to Parker and Ethan for our tech support in the background. Andrea, thank you very much for the typing and doing the text notes. We appreciate that. And Ganatan, who came over and helped us with our lighting today. So if you noticed, we didn't turn a bright pink today. So thank you, Ganatan, for that. Jeffrey, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy. And lastly, for everyone, whenever you hear great knowledge like this, there's this feeling that your fears and small-mindedness go away. In the Bhagavad Gita, the word that Krishna uses for Arjuna, who's sitting down on the chariot in the midst of a situation where he's supposed to be a participant, is utishta, stand up. So first, I'd like us all in our minds to stand up as one does with a great speaker to thank our speaker for being here with us. And so we stand up and honor you. And the second is, now that you're standing up, remember that and do not be afraid anymore. That's the real ultimate moksha. Do not be afraid. Be judicious, but never afraid. And utishta, stand up with wisdom in your heart.
Thank you. Namaste,
Thank
everybody.
you, Nilesh, for being with us.
hard stop, but if anybody wants to say anything after, you're welcome to put your video on, and we'll just say a few words before we go.
Namaste, Sandy G.
Hi, sweetie. How are you? Where are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I think you got to enable my video again.
Hold on. I'm going to unmute yourself. I don't have control of your videos. Everyone can put their videos on now.
It says co-host as asked. Oh, excellent.
There you are. You're a troublemaker over there asking questions.
I am.
2 for 1.
I have, you know, I've been a student of Jeffrey's for 10 years, and, you know, is
Since he's 15.
yeah. He's agitated my mind, and then I've picked his brain, and you know, I've done a lot of my own research, and I've asked many people, right? And I've not been attached to anything yet, right? So I think it's a constant seeking. So, you know, I won't bore everyone, but I'd love to get in touch with you one day, because I have many questions about the Ramayana and the dating of it, with regards to the two main theories. Is that, okay, did it happen 15,000 years ago, or did it happen 1.22 million years ago? And you know, what are your thoughts about the other species that were on the ground at that time? And you know, my understanding was that, you know, they didn't really come from here. And I also take a look at everything has cycles, as above, so below, and everything happens again. And when you talked about theories of the rivers being dated or carved in a particular way, is it also possible that the Earth has a cyclical time cycle as well? That the continents and the polar ice caps and the water levels also move up and down in a very similar way, just like how we have seasons. And so I'm just wondering, when you're coming up with your, and I'm calling them theories, when you're coming up with your theories or whatever you're proposing, are they just from the tangibilities of what you can see? And, you know, how do you test carbon dating to come up with what you propose? Okay.
And I'd like to answer that a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the problems with technical people is they're a little too detailed, and if they're not careful, it distorts the conversation, because they're trying to go to technical levels, and it distorts the picture that's just been made that holds a particular view. So intelligent questions are just that, but sometimes they distort and leave a distorted perspective behind. So everyone should know this about times when speakers are speaking. They're trying to leave everyone with a frame, and the questions shouldn't disturb that frame, because it disturbs the benefit. Offline with the person, you can be sure your questions won't disturb them.
Yes, okay.
So just remember that as context for situations like this as well.
Yes, one should read the Mahabharata and the Ramayana before they critique anybody's dating.
There's a great story. It is that an executive got in a hot air balloon, went up quite high, and then lost control, and it landed near a city area, and there was a person down below, and he called down to that person and said, hey, you, where am I? And the person down below said, you're at latitude this, longitude this, and this, and this, and you're at so many thousand feet. And the person in the balloon said, you must be a professor. And he said, yes, I am. How did you know? He said, well, because your answer was very accurate, but it didn't help me at all. And the person down below said, and you must be a CEO. And he said, yes, I am. How did you know? He said, well, you're above everyone else. You got where you are by hot air, and you haven't got a clue where to go next.
Got it.
So there are many types, and we all fall into various categories, but you're always brilliant. Thank you.
I think one just must take the time to read these books And they just leave you in amazement that they were written, even if it was only 5,000 years ago. How did they have the intelligence to embed story upon story, and the clarity of mind and the visions? I mean, I remember one of the weddings in the Mahabharata where there's 1,500 white elephants and 5,000 handmaidens in the bridal party, and the streets are paved of gold. How the heck did they even think of these concepts? I mean, it is the most elaborate wedding description you have ever heard. Nobody today could possibly have a wedding as they describe in these epics. So it just boggles my mind that a primitive culture would come up with such a complex story.
And they could have been smoking something very good. There's no question. But we'd like to think that because Sanskrit doesn't require intoxicants, they also somehow exalted the human imagination in ways that we're supposed to learn from, so that we too get empowered artistically. And I think the artistry is very important to always remember, not just knowledge.
Anybody else have a comment? We're going to have Nilesh back. There's no doubt about it. So we just want to hear more from him. Anyone else?
Nilesh, do you think at some point you would make a movie about this? Because I think speaking about it is connects with some people, but a visual helps to really change the dynamic.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into another question answer session, but yes, there are, if you know the Bollywood industry, there are a few big names that, there is some discussions happen. Right now, few documentaries being discussed, docudrama, and also even biopic, go figure, so like me going through the struggle. But again, everything as is time, place, circumstances. So when, the time is right, things will happen.
Wonderful.
There's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that uses the term desha, kala, patra.
Yes.
Place, time, person, or circumstance. And we must always carefully envision all of those as we progress with more and more wisdom.
Okay.
I had one more thing. Nilesh, how do you talk about the relevance of these particular stories to contemporary culture? Like, how do you, again, tie that in? This is a wonderful story. It has all these details. It has these astronomical, astrological references. But what does that mean for me today?
Okay. Quick answer. I know Sandy wants to stop me there for another session. What does Jeffrey use just now? Desha, kale, cha, patre, cha. Taddanam, satvikam, srutam, it goes. But desha, kala, patra. So, for example, I always start with why, how, and what. So at a very high level, it is the Brahma Jnana. It's the Atma Jnana, knowing about yourself, knowing about what this is about, right? Moksha in that sense. But then you always want to break it down. So when I break it down, then it gets into what the audience is. So if I'm talking to a engineering student, PhDs in engineering, then I will talk about the aspects of Mahabharata that, that they find they can relate to.
Okay.
If it's something else, I'll talk about that. The idea is, doesn't matter, yena kena prakarena, Jeffrey would know that, somehow bring yourself to that supreme, to bring it to that consciousness. So whatever, that's why I mentioned Swadharma. Whatever appeals to you, start there. Eventually you get to the whole. So I usually find this very convenient. In fact, when I go to the villages of India, and I find it, they don't have a technical background. But to my amazement, they understand these intricate astronomy technicalities much faster. In fact, Jeffrey was with me in Jabalpur like 4 years ago. And there's these village folks, they were, I would explain something, they were explaining back to me and said, did I say it correct? And I said, well, you said it phenomenal. And I asked someone to record it. And I said, I don't know why, but many of the astronomy professors don't seem to understand. So it's really having that shraddha, that reverence that really allows you, shraddhavan labate jnanam, That's a basic ingredient to have the faith, that the conviction, and then it really helps you understand. If you start with a doubt, then it's a tough journey. Doubt has a place, but not at the beginning.
As the English poet said, if the sun and moon should doubt, they would immediately go out. So doubting is different than questioning. Questioning is a process of sharpening your understanding. Doubting is a way of putting your light out. And if you confuse the two, then it's very problematic. The moksha doesn't occur. Remember the moksha and the standing up to your full height and the humility to share everything with everyone at the right time and the patience to know to do so and the love that never goes away. These are the ultimate fruits of all of these conversations. Thank you, Nilesh.
Hi, Diane. Did you have a question?
Since we're consciousness that was never born and never dies, could the wisdom used in these ancient cultures for amazing accomplishments, especially cultures where we are very much into spiritual practice, could this awareness be simply the remembrance from other times, like tuning into what's needed, like we remember things, they come to us because we're connected to that all-pervasive consciousness? Could we not just be tuning into those things? Could that not explain a lot of these amazing things that are created?
Jeffrey, you want to answer or?
Well, I'll start. Diana, this is dangerously close to all of the people in our civilization who, upon hearing this knowledge, 3 years later appoint themselves guru and say that it's all within you. Of course, having had many lifetimes, many things could indeed be within us. But what's important in this kind of learning is that it's coming from outside of us, from a culture that has been ignored and depreciated and not appreciated for what it is. So all of us receiving this knowledge should be very careful to show a huge applause and recognition to the outer sources of it, rather than jump too quickly to what our inner self could know, our inner guru, our inner authority, etc. Needless to say, we're all being invited to become Mahatmas. We're all being invited to go to that level, but it does require very great tapasya on our part, not just a quick awakening and we're there. So those kinds of perspectives are risky in the modern context. And the people from Bharat, from India, are very sensitive to this because they still see themselves being colonized without truly being appreciated. So just hold both thoughts in mind. One that's true internally, the other is how important it is to give external credence and recognition and heal the wounds of colonization. Anything from you, Nilesh?
Yeah, if I may add, think of these as a layers of reality. So there is a vyavaharik, that's a Sanskrit word. This is a practical, pragmatic things, the way we are talking right now. For all it matters, we could be all dreaming and having this Zoom conference call, for all it matters. So there is a layer of reality. When we are in a dream, when we are in the dream, we don't think it's a dream. We think it's a reality. When we come out of it, now we realize that's a dream. There is another layer of reality, Jagruti, Swapni, Sushupti, Turiya, these are various different states of consciousness, where what our current existence may feel like a dream. And there are descriptions of these in these ancient, scriptures and literature. But back to this, itihasa, I said, itihasa, Mahabharata is a itihasa, has many layers. The one is like a history layer. So that's what I talked about, the timing and whatnot. So we don't really need to imagine something else because that's what we can find out. But is that the only objective? Just to tell a story of a war and when did it happen? No, there is a lot more to it. So specific aspect, you can imagine with the help of a guru, how to understand it. I mean, so I heard Sandy mentioning a class on the Mahabharata that Jeffrey's doing on the weekend. So that's when you take help of somebody who is experienced. But when we have a clear reality, with a decent explanation, we don't have to artificially force something mysterious. It just may not be there. I mean, for all it matters, this could be a dream. But I'm willing to bet that this is not a dream at this level. This is a true Zoom call. So we have to use our consciousness to decide.
Nilesh, are you based in India?
I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Yeah.
Which is not even southern India. That's a place really in the deep south.
All right. Are we all, everybody happy? All right. So thank you again, everybody. It's lovely having a little chit chat with you after the official video, just to see your lovely faces and connect. And Ashwini, thank you so much for taking care of that brilliant man. This is Nilesh's wife. I'll mute you here. Hold on.
Otherwise known in Sanskrit as Dharma Patni.
I'll unmute. There you go.
Here's mine.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you so much for having us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It was wonderful having you visit. So I'm insisting you come again. I know you have relatives in Alberta, I think.
Why don't you guys come over to stay here?
Yeah, it's time for you guys to visit us.
Thank you again so much for making this so beautiful. And everybody else, we'll see you on Sunday. And I look forward to it. All right, everybody. Namaste.
Thanks, everybody. Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye, Farah.